Hello and welcome to SIY-Sew It Yourself. I am Stephanie Soebbing from Quilt Addicts Anonymous, your host for today's tutorial. SIY is sponsored by the Jaftex family of fabrics, which is Henry Glass, Free Spirit, Blank, and Studio E. They make fabulous fabrics that appeal to a wide range of tastes. So if you enjoy this tutorial, make sure you head over to SIY-Sew-It-Yourself.com to find a participating retailer near you and show your love by buying your fabrics for this project here. And let me tell you, it's one you're going to want to make again and again. We are going to make the 15-minute table runner. Now, I made this a long time ago as a gift from my grandma. And I remember it taking longer than 15 minutes, and I consider myself a very fast but accurate quilter. So we're going to see, I'm going to time myself, see if we can actually do it in 15 minutes. I am working today with Mia Charo's latest collection, Bird Garden, which is available through Free Spirit. So make sure you find a retailer near you that has gotten this. I'm using their beautiful Monica print, and then we're going to use this as our center. So I am going to fussy cut that. So if I'm a little over 15 minutes, we're going to say it's close enough because I'm going to spend a little bit of extra time cutting this than you would if you were just using regular fabric. And that's the point where we're going to see if I can in fact do this in 15 minutes. And then we're going to have some fun with it. We're going to embellish it. So this is the part that's going to take a little bit longer than 15 minutes. We're going to learn how to make a yo-yo and add a few buttons for a nice little decoration. This is a great opportunity to use those buttons that you see that look just completely impractical. Like, who is going to use this giant flower, but it's going to look gorgeous over a yo-yo, and maybe layer a few things on here just to create some fun dimension and some fun visual interest for your project. So that's going to be a little extra, and you can add these to any project, but they look really good on a table runner. So some of the things that I was looking for when I picked my buttons for this, just as an FYI, was, does the color match? It was kind of challenging to match this print here, which is part of the collection, as it is so like that dusty peachy pink. So I didn't want pink. I wanted that dusty. So I found some buttons that are really tiny. They're 1/4 inch buttons. I think they're meant for more of doll clothes. And I'm going to use those, I think, for my top. But then I found this pack, and there were a lot of colors in here that didn't match. Like, I would not use these. This is too pink. And there is some yellow in it, but it's more of a goldenrod. And I don't see too much purple. So like, those are ones, they're not going to get used. But this green matched really well, and we have lots of blue flowers. So I think we're going to do something like this, where we're going to layer it all up, and that'll be really fun. All right, so I set my yo-yo and embellishment supplies off to the side because we won't need those to the very end. Right now, we're going to start with our 2 pieces. You're going to need a 1/4 yard of whatever you want your center strip of your fabric to be, and you need a 1/2 yard or 18 inches of whatever you want the strips to be, and then this also kind of forms the corners, and it is the back. There's no batting in this project, so that helps make it really, really fast. Now, if you're doing one like this beautiful birds print from Mia Charo, you might want to get a little extra, because what I'm going to do here is I'm going to measure out the distance of this bird, how tall it is, and then I'm going to try to cut, and it probably will be here because I have a little bit extra room here, to make it so that this bird is centered in my table runner. It's totally worth taking a little bit extra time, especially when you have a really specific print like this one, to make sure that everything is perfectly centered, so that way it doesn't look crooked on your table when it's all done. But otherwise, you could just cut this at 9 inches wide and this one at 18 inches wide, call it a day, you're good to go. All right, so we are about to start. This is what is recording my audio as I do this. We are officially going to start at the 12-minute mark, and we're going to see how we go start to finish if we can do this in 15 minutes. All right, so like I said, this is going to take me a little bit longer because I'm not just going to cut 9 inches across like I normally would. What I want to start with doing, so that I can make sure this bird is down the center, is measure this. And it is just shy of 6 inches. So that means I want to cut, basically line up 1.5 inches on either side of this print. But I want to also make sure that I'm unfolding it, because very rarely is fabric like this printed super straight. So you definitely want to cut this one layer at a time. All right, so I'm going to line up that with 1.5 inch mark on that line, and we're going to cut down. All right, so now I'm going to repeat by flipping it around. I don't need my cutting mat for a little bit. We are going to get our sewing machine out in just a second. So what I'm going to do here is just lay out my entire section, and I'm going to put it so that the selvages are on the same side here. See over here, here's my printed selvage, and I'm going to match that up with the printed selvage of my center. Now I'm going to put these right sides together, and I'm just going to stitch down. I know some people like to pin this. To me, this is no different than strip piecing. So I'm going to start on the side with the printed selvage, and I'm just going to stitch from one end to the other. All right, I've got, again, those edges lined up. That's important because we're also going to line them up when we sew this end here to the other side of what we're working on. And we just want to make sure that we are nice and even as we're going down. So I sew this the way I would any strip piece. I just kind of line it up and put my finger at the edge of where my sewing machine throat is, and I'm going to stitch. And when my finger is drawn up to where that feed dog is, I just repeat, line up my edges, and go again. Now in this case, my selvage ends are lining up at the end here, but do not be concerned if they don't. It's very common for fabrics, even within the same line, to be a little bit different length. All right, so we have sewn one side of our center panel to our sort of sashing and background. Now we have to sew this side to our other side of our sashing and background. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to flip this up, and I'm going to arrange that right sides together. Now here's kind of the important bit. I am still going to start on the side of this printed selvage, and I'm going to stitch down this way. If you've ever sewn curtains, you know that it is always important to start from the top and go down, because sometimes things shift a little weird on you and then they're not square in the end. So this is just something that I like to do to help make sure that everything lays nice and flat. And to be honest, it really doesn't matter if you're starting with the printed side of the selvage or not, as long as you stick with the same side for both seams. And I am using that Quilter's 1/4 inch seam for this entire project. So now we're going to take this project to the iron. And I love pressing my seams open in absolutely all applications. So that's what I'm going to do here, but you could press them to the side if you're more comfortable with that. What I'm doing here is I'm just using my fingers as a guide to kind of open that seam up and pre-press it down ahead of the iron. And then I'm keeping the tip of that iron right down that center seam. All right, I'm going to reposition this a little bit here. Just kind of give you a preview of what it's going to look like with the two edges there. Again, I'm going to press that seam open. This time I'm kind of angling my iron in a little bit so that way I don't press over this fold here, because that's not going to be permanent. All right, so now we're going to grip at about the center of where our center panel is, and we're going to do that on both sides. And we're going to kind of just flip it up like you were like folding a towel or a sheet or something. And we're going to lay this down. This is the absolute only time we need a pin. I'm going to take, and actually we don't need it quite yet, but we will very soon. I'm going to line it up so that my seams are right on top of each other here. If this isn't absolutely perfect, it's probably not the end of the world, but we want to get it as close to straight as we can. All right, so I've just got that ruler positioned a little bit in from where the printing starts on the fabric, and we're going to trim. Then we're going to repeat on the other side. Line up those seams, get it flat so we can get a nice right angle, and trim. No white showing at this point, or none of those little dots that sometimes happen at the end of the selvage, because this could potentially be visible depending on how wide your seam is at this point. All right, so this is the one time I'm going to use pins in this project. What I'm doing here is I'm lining up to make those seams right on top of each other. Now what we're going to do next is on one side, we're going to stitch completely from one end to the other. And you're going to backstitch at the front and the end of that seam. On the other side, what you're going to do is you're going to start it off and stitch in like 2 inches or so. I'll just put a pin in. And then you are going to stop, back up those stitches again, and then start again about 3-4 inches later, just large enough that you can get your hand through, so that way we can leave an opening to turn everything right side out. So I'm starting with the side that I'm going to sew completely through. So I'm going to stitch forward and back to secure that edge like you were sewing a garment, and then we're just going to stitch like normal. Now when I come to this first half of the seam allowance, see, I've stopped with the needle down very close to that pin. I'm in that first half of the seam allowance. Now I can remove this pin and I'd be confident that the seam that I pinned very carefully is not going to move on me. So now I can sew to the end. And when I reach the end, I'm going to back stitch again, a couple stitches, and then sew off the edge. Now here's the second side where I'm going to leave that opening for turning. So we're starting the same way by back stitching, stopping on that seam and removing my pin, and then I'm going to sew to this blue pin and do my back stitch. The back stitch at this point is going to help ensure that you have a nice solid end to your seam, and that way you won't be worrying about ripping some stitches open when you flip it right side out. All right, so I'm going to start again about 2 inches from the edge, so that way my corner is nice and secure too, because you don't want to be stitching an opening that's closed in a corner. That's no fun. So stitch to the end, back stitch, and we're done with that part. Now, just so we don't have bulk in the end, what I'm doing here is I'm going to clip these corners. You want to be very careful that you are just clipping the corner off and not the seam that we backstitch at the edge. That's going to cause you problems. So now we're going to take our hand and slide it in through the hole we left, and I didn't leave mine quite big enough. I'm going to reach all the way to the end, and we're going to pull it out. Now, before I stitch this opening closed, I'm going to make sure to use my fingertip, or like a mechanical pencil works good. And there are actually corner turners that are meant for this particular kind of thing. But make sure you poke out those corners really well. Anytime I have an opening like this to stitch closed, I like to press it before I sew it so I can make sure that that quarter inch seam goes in. So we're going to start by making a quilter's knot. You're going to take and align the end of the thread so it's in the opposite direction of the needle. And then you're going to pinch that between your thumb and forefinger and wrap it 3 to 4 times around the needle. Then you're going to take your loops and pinch them between your thumb and forefinger and pull the needle out. And when you get to the end of the thread, you're going to have a tiny little knot. Now I'm going to go through and whip stitch this, which basically means that after hiding my thread knot, I am just going to poke it through the ends and just kind of catch the edges here. Got a little thread tail there that I'll clip later. But I want to catch both sides. You can see here I've clipped both sides of that. And I'm just kind of wrapping around every 1/16 of an inch or so. So when you get to the end, we're going to do another quilter's knot. But this time we're going to wrap it around 3 or 4 times, really close to the last stitch we took. And just keep that needle right there. And then pinch it and pull it through. And this is going to give you the same knot, but really close to where your last stitch was. So that way we can just take our needle, put it through 1 layer of fabric only, and bury that knot. Now the last thing we have to do is arrange this so that way we can press it out. So when you pull this, you're going to create kind of a triangle, and your edge is going to go in the center there, and then it's going to lay flat. You can arrange this somewhat to make sure that you have absolutely equal sides on either side. For the sake of trying to do it in 15 minutes, I'm going to eyeball it, and I'm going to spritz everything with my SIY-Master and spray. All right, we're done. Let's check in on the time. We are at 45.5 minutes. We started at 12 minutes, so that would be 33 minutes to make the 15-minute table runner. I think we can definitively say that the 15-minute table runner is not a 15-minute table runner. It's more like a half an hour table runner, but it still is a really fast project. You can do it in under an hour, including adding some embellishment, which is what we're about to do. So there are a couple of different things that you can do at this step Some people choose to just add a little button here. Some people will just stitch across this on the sewing machine. It's also a great idea to add like a little bit of decorative trim in here. But what I'm going to do today is show you how to make a yo-yo using a quick yo-yo maker from Clover. You can probably get this at your local quilt shop. And it really makes it easy. And it comes in a couple of different sizes. So I have a small one, which is the green one, and a large one here. And what I save the packaging for it, and I think I'm going to store my pieces in it, is it shows you the actual finished size. So you can see here and kind of audition your buttons on top of it and see if you like it. So because I want to use this big flower button, this is not a good yo-yo size to go with because it completely covers it. But if I audition it over here, I can still see a little bit of the yo-yo, and then I can still stack a couple of things if I want on top of it. But I know I'm still going to be able to see the fabric and the cool pleating that it creates when we create the yo-yo. And so this is the size that I'm going to go with for here, and I'm just going to keep this in my Notions drawer. All right, so I'm starting with my yo-yo maker and a piece of fabric. So I'm going to pop this out. It comes as 2 pieces. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to flip the right side down against the flat side of the disc here. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this section, and you'll see there's 2 different sides of it. There is a kind of smooth side, and then this side is more matte, and it has these 5 lines on it that make it kind of look like a sand dollar. And you are going to stick that in place. Now, before I knock this all in place, I want to make sure that these lines line up because you have some really neat little grooves here that we're going to sew through, and then they have to fit through the stitches on the other side. So I'm just going to make sure that we're lining up. We are not here. So it is a lot easier to give this a little bit of an adjustment now than it is after we've clipped it in. So I'm going to just give it a little bit of a shift. And I'm trying to also kind of center that fabric. And I'm just starting by poking through those holes. I think I'm still not going to be it. Yep, that one still can't go through. Try and give it just a little shift. What I want to do is have it poke through and have it come through one of these things that kind of look like a smiley face on the other end. That is my goal. Oh, got it. So we can see here that it came straight through. And so now I've got this positioned correctly. Now I can snap it into place. I found it's easiest to snap into place if you kind of push down on it with your thumb fingernails, and you can hear that snapping into place there. Now from here, I just make sure that I've got it like positioned kind of evenly. We're going to trim this down to a 1/4 inch seam here. Oops, that popped out. We don't want that. We want to hold it nice and tight. So now I'm going to take my scissors and I'm just going to trim this down so that it is maybe like 3/8 of an inch above where the edge of that is, edge of this orange part here. And I'm going to do that all the way around to kind of create a circle. All right, is my seam super even? No. Does it matter? Also no, because they're going to be tucked inside when we're all done. So now I've threaded a needle with just white thread. You could do matching thread. It's all going to be hidden in the end. And what I'm going to do is I am going to start right next to one of these points here. They have them at different points. There's a couple of them. There's one here, here, and here. But pick one. Actually, there's 5. They correspond with those 5 lines that look like a sand dollar on the back. So pick one and start just to the left of it. All right, so just in case this happens to you at home, I just spent a solid couple of minutes fiddling with this because it shifted when I popped it in, and it was no longer in alignment anymore with my grooves on the back and the little teeth there and the little smiley faces on the front. So back to where we are at. What I'm doing is I'm kind of holding down that first piece where I'm going to start, and I'm starting right next to this little groove here as kind of my starting point. So I'm putting my needle in, and you can see that I have caught the fabric on the wrong side. And we're going to come up, and don't pull too hard. We don't want to pull that quilter's knot out. And then you're going to come in on the other side of that smiley face. And then we're going to repeat that process going around the yo-yo. So the first couple of times, it's always good to kind of look at the back and make sure you have that folded under, and then poke your needle through the front. You can see we're still catching everything. That's what we want. And we're just going to repeat that process around the entire yo-yo, going counterclockwise. All right, so now I've made it all the way around. I can see my thread here of where I started my knot, and then I have where I just came out. Now what I want to do to really close this up and get a nice yo-yo is I'm going to, there's my starting point, I'm going to do that first stitch one more time, going up and then back down. And we're not going to make any knots here yet. We have to pull this tight, but this is where it is. What you want to check, and the first time I did this, I totally messed it up, is that you have in fact passed that first stitch. It can be hard to see sometimes. And then also that you can see all your stitches on the back side. It should be a fairly long stitch. And if you're good with that, then you're going to take this center area and we're going to push on it, and our center disc is going to pop out. So I'm going to set this part to the side, and now we should be able to peel out these areas. Now, if this is not coming apart, it means that you stitched wrong at some point and you trap this on the inside. So examine your stitches, make sure you went through all those little smiley faces. So now we have a piece of fabric where the edges have all been turned in like this, and we're going to gently tug on this, and you want this to be kind of turning inward as you do it, so that way this is all kind of pulled to the center. So I got that kind of started, and I'm going to keep gathering those stitches up until they all come nice and neat to the center. There we go. All right, so now we have the cute little yo-yo. If you look at it from the other side, it just looks like a funny little circle. But here we get this really fun texture that is created. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to stitch through where these two are, because that's where it needs to be secured so that it stays nice and tight. So I'm going to take my thread and I'm going to go through where you can see my thread is coming out of this little pleat here, and the previous one was right here. So I'm going to stitch through that so that way I can pull this tight and it'll stay tight. All right, so that's looking pretty good and it's feeling pretty tight. So I'm going to do a knot now, and the way I do a knot for this is I'm going to take yet another stitch through here. And then as I'm bringing my loop in, I'm going to pass my needle through one of those loops. Let's do this over the background so you can see that a little better. All right, so we can see this thread loop here. I'm going to pass my needle through it, and that'll create a knot as I close up my stitch. So that's really good. I'm going to do it one more time, and I'm just kind of connecting two pleats as I do it. I feel like, you know, that's never a bad thing to just sort of stitch over it. And we're going to do one more knot here, just for good measure. All right, so I made my little knot. What I should do here is stitch into one of those pleats and then just come out the side here with that needle. You can see it there, and just pull it. And that's going to hide your extra thread and you will be fine. By the way, I learned to quilt on like PBS watching Fonz and Porter. And I just want to say that one time I remember them saying, we do our best sewing off camera, and I thought, that's BS. But it is true, because this one turned out a lot better than this one is. But we're about to cover it up with a button that's rather large, so if yours has a rather larger opening than you plan on, it's okay. This does not need to be a stressful project for you. All right, so we can see here that this is our seam where our table runner comes to where our main fabric is. I want to try to center this hole right over where the seam is kind of making a right angle, and right over that. And you can see it really sets it off well. It pairs well with all of the peaches that are in it because it's part of the collection, but it also has some nice contrast with this back here. So now I'm going to grab my buttons that I picked to go with this project, and I had picked 3 at the start of this project that I think would look good because we've got lots of blue flowers. This green goes really good with the green that's there, and this tiny little peach button matches fabulously. You can't even see it right now. But when I went to stack them, I thought that 3 of them was too much. So what I'm doing instead is I'm just going to go with the 2 because we already have a little bit of peach in the fabric. And then we're going to have buttons on top of that to kind of bring out some of the other colors that are in there and be evocative of the floral theme that's going on in here. It's going to be super cute. Now, I don't know about you, I've sewn buttons before on home decor stuff and they popped off as they've been used and abused because I have kids and a husband. So what I'm going to use for this one is actually thread this meant for a button. And I'm using white. We're going to see it on the back, but it's a tape runner. No one's going to see the back and it'll look cute on the top. So we're fine there. All right, so we want to hide this thread tail. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to start it off right underneath where this part is kind of open and just pull it through on that seam. That way I know that everything's going to be kind of centered and it will be totally covered up. I do have kind of a long thread tail here though, so I'm going to go ahead and clip that. So now we're going to start stacking our pieces. We're going to start with our yo-yo. I promise you in a couple of minutes it will not look unruly anymore because we're going to add things. And then we're going to add on our first button. And because I like to have a little extra pizzazz, we're going to do a second button too. Now for buttons that sew on shirts, they're all supposed to have the same width in between, but I find that's not always the case for decorative buttons. So I'm going to put in my needle through that first one and then find my way into the second needle hole. And then I'm going to just put it straight down, pinch everything together, and push it through the back side. But before I go back up, I'm taking a look, make sure I like the position of everything, as it's going to be challenging to move things after. And you can see, you can't even tell that I had kind of a wider opening on that yo-yo right now. So I'm going to, while holding this thread really taut, I'm going to pinch everything together. And then I'm going to come in, an inch, not even, just a button width away of where I think I need to be. And then it's a little bit of figuring that first time around to get everything through. So you're going to lose a little bit of that tautness, but you can get it back when you pull your upper thread through again. Let's see how many I did for this one. I think I did 3 passes. Yep, I did 3 buttonhole passes to keep that nice and secure. So from this point, everything gets a little easier because we've tightened everything up pretty well. Everything's lined up pretty well on top of each other. So I'm going to go underneath. And I'm going to try to go kind of right where I came up the last time to kind of keep my areas together. Sometimes that works. Sometimes you got to move your needle around to figure out exactly where the hole placement is. All right, got that all through. And so this is going to be my last pass through here. So now I'm going to pull everything very taut on this side. And there's probably an official way to tie off a buttonhole. I don't know it. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to put my needle underneath the threads I already have. And we're going to do the same thing we did before, where we're going to pass our needle through the loop that's created, tie that off, and I'm going to do that one more time. And then I'm going to bury this thread just like we did before. So I'm passing my needle through the fabric, but not through, I can't see it at all from the front side when we look here. It's just the floral. So once we have it back to the side, I'm just going to go ahead and pull that through and clip that thread where it came out, and then we don't see that thread tail anywhere. Now, if anything did shift around on you, you can kind of adjust how the yo-yo lays a little bit at this point, but not a ton. So you can kind of make it look a little more centered if you weren't super happy with how the circle appears at this point. But it's a really cute add-on. Again, it's not something you have to do. You can just sew a single button there, or you can just top stitch along the seam, or maybe add a little bit of trim underneath here and then top stitch. It really is up to you and how creative you want to be, and what you can either find in the store or you already have in your stash that might coordinate with the fabric you're using. So for posterity, that entire process from start to finish took me 15 minutes to create the yo-yo, and sew on the buttons. And since I want to have 2, that would add an extra half an hour. So if you want to do the 15-minute table runner, for one, it can't actually be sewn in 15 minutes. I used to make at least 1 quilt a month from start to finish, including writing the pattern and quilting it. So if I cannot sew it in 15 minutes, I do not think that it is actually possible. I am a very fast and proficient sewer, but plan on spending about 30 minutes on doing this, maybe a little more if you are a newbie and you are not as confident in your sewing skills. But it took me a half an hour to make the actual table runner, and then another half an hour to add these little embellishments, but that's totally something that you could do while you're sitting down at the end of the day, just sitting and watching a little bit of your favorite streaming show. So totally doable, very, very fun. Again, this collection is called Bird Garden by Mia Charo, and it is really cute, really adorable. We use the kind of bird panel-ish and fussy cut that for our center, and then we had a nice dark frame, which is going to look gorgeous, and then we used one of the kind of blender prints in the collection to add a little pizzazz with some decorative buttons on the sides. This is going to be fabulous for spring. It's a real fast and easy project, and you can easily do it for every month of the year because it's not a long project to make. It's not even a weekend project. You can do it in an hour, maybe 2 if you're a newbie and you want to get fancy with how you add your decorations here. But it's a really inexpensive project as well because you only need a 1/4 yard of your center fabric and a 1/2 yard of your lining. And then this was just 2 5-inch squares would be enough to create your decorative details. Honestly, probably the most expensive part of this was buying a pack of buttons to get the 4 that I used in this project. But it's fun. A lot of people have button stashes, so you might be able to find something from what you already have in your drawer as well. But the fabric is in stores now, so make sure you head over to SIY-Sew-It-Yourself.com and find a participating SIY retailer near you and look for Mia Charo Bird Garden for Free Spirit Fabrics. A big thanks to Jaftex for sponsoring today's video tutorial for you guys. Would not be possible without them, as well as the entire SIY Sew It Yourself hub, where you can chat with other sewers and get some advice on the projects that you're working with, as well as share what you've created. Make sure you head on over there and join so you can join in on the fun. Jaftex is the owner of Free Spirit Fabrics, Henry Glass, Studio E, and Blank, and they have lots of different fabrics for all different tastes. So if some modern looking birds is not your style, they've got a little bit of everything. I'm Stephanie Soebbing from Quilt Addicts Anonymous, and thank you so much for joining us today for this tutorial. I would love to see you guys make this over at the SIY Hub. All right, until next time, happy quilting.